By the time night shows up, something strange has already happened inside your head. You are not suddenly lazy or careless. You are depleted. Every tiny choice you made today quietly took a piece of your mental strength. What to wear, how to respond to a message, whether to speak up or stay quiet. None of them felt heavy in the moment, but together they drained you. So when you finally lie down and make one last decision, like whether to scroll a little longer or actually sleep, your brain is no longer equipped to choose well. Here is the uncomfortable part. The decisions you make when you are mentally exhausted are often the opposite of what you would choose if you were fully rested. People assume bad decisions come from bad intentions or low intelligence. In reality, they often come from an overworked mind that has burned through its fuel. Judges give harsher sentences later in the day. Doctors are more likely to make errors near the end of long shifts. Shoppers buy junk food at night, even when they swore they would eat clean. Logical thinking does not disappear all at once. It slowly weakens, and you rarely notice it happening. Your brain runs on a limited resource. Psychologists call it cognitive control. It is what allows you to resist impulses, evaluate consequences, and think through long-term outcomes. Every decision draws from that same pool. The problem is that the pool does not refill instantly. When it runs low, the brain looks for shortcuts. It favors comfort over logic, familiar habits over thoughtful choices, immediate relief over future benefit. That is why decision fatigue does not make you stop deciding. It makes you decide badly. Think about the moment right before sleep. You tell yourself you should put the phone down. You know tomorrow will be harder if you do not. You understand the logic perfectly. Yet your thumb keeps scrolling. This is not a willpower failure. It is your brain conserving energy. Logical reasoning requires effort. Mindless behavior does not. So your brain quietly nudges you toward the easier path, even when it contradicts what you actually want. There is a reason decision fatigue feels invisible. It does not announce itself. It disguises itself as cravings, procrastination, emotional reactions, and sudden irrational justifications. You tell yourself one more episode will help you relax. You convince yourself responding to that message right now is necessary. These explanations feel real because your tired brain believes them. When mental energy drops, the emotional centers of the brain gain influence, while the rational centers lose control. That imbalance changes how things feel, not just how they are. What makes this especially dangerous at night is that sleep itself depends on good decisions. You need to choose to wind down, dim the lights, disengage from stimulation. But decision fatigue makes those choices feel heavier than they should. The effort required to prepare for rest suddenly feels overwhelming. So you delay, and the longer you delay, the worse the fatigue becomes. It turns into a loop that feeds itself. This is why highly disciplined people still make irrational nighttime choices. Discipline does not protect you from exhaustion. In fact, disciplined people often make more decisions during the day, which drains them faster. By night, their logical defenses are worn thin. The brain does not care how motivated you are. It cares how much energy remains. When that energy is low, comfort wins. There is something oddly relieving about understanding this. It means you are not broken, you are human. Your brain is operating exactly as it was designed to under strain. Decision fatigue is not a flaw. It is a signal. It tells you that your mind has been working hard and needs rest, not more pressure or self-criticism. Once you see decision fatigue for what it is, your nighttime behavior starts to make sense. the impulsive thoughts, the emotional reactions, the choices that feel slightly off. They are not random. They are predictable outcomes of a tired brain trying to survive the end of the day with as little effort as possible. And here is the part most people miss. The more you try to think your way out of decision fatigue, the worse it gets. Logic is the very tool that is running low. This is why simple routines and automatic habits are so powerful at night. They remove the need to decide. When decisions disappear, mental energy is preserved, and the brain can finally let go. There are many hidden forces shaping the strange choices you make before sleep. Decision fatigue is only one of them. But once you recognize it, you start noticing the others quietly influencing you when your guard is down. Reduced impulse control from mental exhaustion. It usually starts with a tiny moment you barely notice. A thought pops up telling you to check something, eat something, say something, or do something you already promised yourself you would not do tonight. You hesitate for half a second. Then you give in. Not because you wanted to. Not because it mattered that much, but because stopping yourself suddenly felt harder than just letting it happen. Here is what most people get wrong. They think impulse control is about character, about discipline, about being strong enough to resist temptation. But impulse control is not a personality trait. It is a mental function, and like every other mental function, it gets tired. When your brain is exhausted, the systems responsible for self-control simply do not fire as effectively. That means the brakes fail long before the desire disappears. Mental exhaustion does not make you reckless. It makes you permissive. Your brain stops arguing with impulses and starts accommodating them. It lowers the bar for what feels acceptable. The thought process shifts from "should I do this" to "whatever, it is fine." And the scary part is that this shift feels completely reasonable in the moment. There is no alarm, no warning, just a quiet surrender. Inside your brain, impulse control lives largely in the prefrontal cortex. This area is responsible for planning, restraint, and long-term thinking. It is also one of the most energy-demanding parts of the brain. When you spend the entire day focusing, regulating emotions, solving problems, and making decisions, the prefrontal cortex burns through its resources. By night, it is fatigued. When that happens, more primitive brain systems take over. These systems care about comfort, reward, and immediate relief. That is why mental exhaustion does not remove your impulses. It removes your ability to pause them. The urge feels louder because the part of your brain that normally keeps it in check is quieter. You still know what the smart choice is, but knowing is no longer enough to stop yourself. The gap between awareness and action disappears. This is why tired people snap at loved ones, overspend online, binge eat, doom scroll, or stay up far later than planned. These are not random lapses. They are predictable outcomes of a brain that no longer has the energy to regulate itself. When impulse control weakens, the easiest option wins. The fastest reward wins. The thing that feels good now wins. What makes this even more deceptive is how the brain justifies it. When impulse control drops, the brain becomes incredibly good at rationalizing. It tells you this will help you relax, that you deserve it, that you will fix it tomorrow. These thoughts feel convincing because they are coming from a brain that is prioritizing relief over accuracy. Logic bends to support comfort. There is a deep emotional component to this. Mental exhaustion increases emotional sensitivity. Small frustrations feel bigger. Delayed gratification feels unbearable. The brain becomes more reactive and less reflective. So impulses are not just about pleasure. They are about escaping discomfort. When you are mentally tired, resisting an impulse can feel like adding weight to an already overloaded system. This is why self-control feels easier in the morning and harder at night. It is not because temptations magically appear after sunset. It is because your regulatory capacity has been steadily declining all day. By the time night arrives, your brain is operating in energy-saving mode. It wants simple, familiar, rewarding behaviors that require minimal effort. Understanding this changes how you interpret your own behavior. Instead of seeing late-night impulsive choices as failures, you can see them as symptoms. Signals that your mental resources are depleted. Signals that your brain is asking for rest, not punishment. The problem is not that you lack control. The problem is that you are trying to control things when the system that enables control is offline. This also explains why trying harder often backfires. When you shame yourself or demand more discipline, at the end of the day, you add cognitive load. You force the brain to work even harder when it has nothing left. That pressure further weakens impulse control. The result is usually another impulsive choice, followed by more frustration. There is something important hidden here. Impulse control is strongest when it is protected, not tested. The less you ask a tired brain to resist, the better it functions. This is why people who rely on routines, boundaries, and environment design appear more disciplined. They are not constantly fighting impulses. They are reducing the number of impulses that reach them when they are exhausted. Once you start noticing reduced impulse control, you see it everywhere. In the way time slips away at night, in the way small indulgences turn into hours, in the way intentions dissolve without a fight. These patterns are not accidents. They are the natural consequence of mental exhaustion meeting a brain wired for survival and reward. And this is only one layer of what happens when your mind is tired. There are deeper psychological shifts that quietly influence your thoughts, emotions, and decisions when you are at your most vulnerable. The more you understand them, the less power they have over you. Emotional reasoning overpowering rational judgment. At some point late in the day, a feeling shows up and quietly takes the steering wheel. You do not notice the handoff. You just notice that something feels off, heavy, irritating, lonely, or urgent. And suddenly your decisions are no longer based on what makes sense. They are based on what feels true in that moment. This is where emotional reasoning takes over. It is the mental shortcut where your brain treats feelings as facts. If it feels wrong, it must be wrong. If it feels pointless, it must be pointless. If it feels comforting, it must be the right choice. And when you are mentally exhausted, this mode of thinking becomes incredibly powerful. Rational judgment does not disappear. It just gets drowned out. The unsettling truth is that emotional reasoning is not rare. It is happening to you every time you say things like "I feel like I am failing, so I probably am," or "this feels overwhelming, so I cannot handle it," or "I feel calm doing this, so it must be good for me." These thoughts do not come from logic. They come from emotion dressed up as certainty. And when your brain is tired, it stops questioning that disguise. Here is why exhaustion matters so much. Rational judgment depends on the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that evaluates evidence, considers alternatives, and slows reactions. Emotional reasoning is driven more by the limbic system, which processes feelings, threat, and reward. When you are mentally fresh, these systems work together. Emotion provides information, and logic evaluates it. When you are mentally depleted, that balance breaks. Emotion gets louder, logic gets quieter. So when a feeling shows up at night, it does not get checked, it gets obeyed. If you feel anxious, your brain looks for immediate relief instead of long-term solutions. If you feel empty, it looks for stimulation. If you feel unmotivated, it assumes the task is meaningless rather than acknowledging fatigue. The feeling becomes the conclusion. This is why emotional reasoning is so convincing. It feels personal. It feels intuitive. It feels like insight. But it is often just your nervous system reacting to exhaustion. A tired brain is more sensitive to negative emotion and less capable of reappraisal. Small worries feel bigger. Minor discomfort feels intolerable. Neutral situations get interpreted through a negative emotional filter. Think about how different your thoughts sound in the morning versus late at night. Problems that felt impossible suddenly seem manageable. Decisions that felt urgent lose their intensity. Nothing external changed. Your emotional state did, and with it, your reasoning style. That contrast reveals how much power emotion has over judgment when cognitive resources are low. Emotional reasoning also explains why people make dramatic conclusions when tired. They assume relationships are failing, futures are doomed, or efforts are pointless based on a temporary feeling. The brain does not say I am exhausted. It says this is how things are, and because the emotional brain is fast and confident, its conclusions feel undeniable. There is a biological reason for this confidence. Emotions evolved to guide quick decisions, especially under threat or stress. They are designed to prioritize speed over accuracy. When your rational system is offline due to fatigue, the brain defaults to this older system. It is not trying to sabotage you. It is trying to conserve energy and keep you safe. The problem is that modern life rarely requires split-second emotional decisions at night, but your brain does not know that. What makes emotional reasoning especially dangerous before sleep is that it shapes behavior quietly. You do not argue with yourself. You just act. You stay up because you feel restless. You avoid something because it feels heavy. You engage in habits because they feel soothing. None of these choices are evaluated for long-term impact. They are justified by how they feel right now. And once emotional reasoning takes over, it creates a feedback loop. Acting on emotion often leads to short-term relief, but long-term consequences. Those consequences create more negative emotion the next day. That emotion then feels like proof that the original belief was correct. The cycle reinforces itself without ever passing through rational analysis. Understanding this is not about suppressing emotion. Emotions are not the enemy. They carry valuable information, but they are signals, not verdicts. When you are mentally exhausted, your brain stops treating them as signals and starts treating them as conclusions. That is the shift that leads to irrational decisions. There is a subtle relief in realizing this. It means your late-night thoughts are not always trustworthy. The heaviness you feel is not always a reflection of reality. It is often a reflection of a tired mind trying to interpret the world with limited tools. That does not mean your feelings are wrong. It means they are incomplete. When you recognize emotional reasoning in real time, something interesting happens. The feeling does not vanish, but its authority weakens. You stop asking, what does this feeling say about my life, and start asking, what does this feeling say about my state? That small shift restores a bit of rational distance, even in exhaustion. There are many psychological forces that quietly take control when your mental energy drops. Emotional reasoning is one of the most persuasive because it feels like truth. But once you see how easily emotion can overpower judgment when you are tired, you begin to question the other invisible influences shaping your decisions when the day winds down. Cognitive overload shutting down critical analysis. At a certain point, your brain does not argue anymore. It stops weighing options. It stops questioning information. It just accepts whatever is in front of it and moves on. Not because it agrees, but because it cannot keep up. That moment is cognitive overload, and once it sets in, critical analysis quietly shuts down. Cognitive overload happens when your brain is given more information, stimulation, and demands than it can process effectively. Messages, notifications, tasks, decisions, emotional input, background noise, unresolved thoughts. Each one alone is manageable. Together, they pile up. Your mind reaches capacity, and when that happens, it does not slow down gracefully. It simplifies. It starts cutting corners. Here is the part that catches people off guard. When critical thinking shuts down, you do not feel confused. You feel numb, passive, or oddly compliant. The brain switches from evaluation mode to survival mode. Instead of asking, "Does this make sense?" it asks what is easiest right now. Instead of analyzing, it absorbs. Instead of questioning, it scrolls. Critical analysis requires mental space. It needs working memory, attention, and energy. Cognitive overload fills that space completely. There is no room left to reflect, so the brain protects itself by filtering out complexity. It favors surface-level understanding. It accepts first impressions. It defaults to familiar patterns. This is not laziness. It is a defense mechanism. Think about how you consume information late at night. Headlines sound more convincing. Opinions feel more intense. Dramatic conclusions feel more believable. You are less likely to fact-check, less likely to notice contradictions, less likely to slow down and think. That is not because the information is better. It is because your brain no longer has the bandwidth to analyze it. Inside the brain, this is a resource issue. Critical analysis depends heavily on the prefrontal cortex, the same region responsible for decision-making and impulse control. When cognitive load exceeds capacity, this region becomes less active. The brain shifts processing to faster, less demanding systems that rely on heuristics and emotional cues. These systems are efficient, but they are not precise. This is why cognitive overload makes people more suggestible. When analysis shuts down, confidence replaces accuracy. Statements that sound certain feel true. Simple explanations feel correct, even when they are incomplete or wrong. The brain is no longer asking, "Is this accurate?" It is asking, "Does this reduce mental strain?" Cognitive overload also explains why complex problems feel impossible at night. The problem itself has not changed. Your capacity to hold multiple variables in mind has. When working memory is overloaded, the brain cannot simulate outcomes, compare options, or see nuance. Everything collapses into a vague sense of too much. That feeling often leads to avoidance, procrastination, or impulsive decisions just to escape the overload. There is an emotional layer to this as well. Cognitive overload increases stress hormones. Stress narrows attention. Narrow attention reduces perspective. You stop seeing the big picture and fixate on immediate stimuli. This tunnel vision further weakens critical thinking. The brain becomes reactive rather than reflective. This is why multitasking late in the day is so damaging. Each task switch adds cognitive load. Each unfinished thought occupies mental space. By the time night arrives, your mind is cluttered with open loops. Even when you are resting physically, your brain is still juggling unresolved inputs. That constant juggling leaves no room for analysis. What makes cognitive overload especially dangerous is that it feels like clarity at first. Simplified thinking can feel decisive, quick judgments feel efficient. But that clarity is artificial. It comes from ignoring complexity, not understanding it. When critical analysis shuts down, nuance disappears. Black and white thinking takes over. Extreme conclusions feel satisfying because they reduce cognitive effort. This is also why people regret decisions made under overload. Once mental space returns, the brain reopens the analysis process. Suddenly flaws become obvious, consequences appear. But in the moment of overload, those considerations were inaccessible, not ignored. Inaccessible. Understanding cognitive overload reframes a lot of self-criticism. You did not fail to think critically. Your brain was saturated. You were asking a system at capacity to do more than it could. That is not a moral issue. It is a cognitive limit. The brain has one reliable way to recover critical analysis. It needs reduction, not motivation. Fewer inputs, fewer decisions, fewer stimuli. When load decreases, analytical capacity returns naturally. You do not force clarity, you make space for it. This is why silence can feel uncomfortable when you are overloaded. Without constant input, unresolved thoughts surface. But that discomfort is part of the reset. It allows the brain to process, integrate, and clear space. Only then can critical thinking come back online. Once you start noticing cognitive overload, you can feel the moment analysis shuts down, the hazy thinking, the impatience with complexity, the urge for simple answers. Those are not signs that something is wrong with you. They are signs that your mind is full. And when the mind is full, it stops questioning not because it trusts everything, but because it cannot afford to doubt. That is when irrational decisions slip in unnoticed, carried by a brain that is no longer evaluating the world, only enduring it. The brain's craving for comfort over accuracy. There is a quiet moment late at night when your brain makes a subtle trade without asking you. It lets go of being right and reaches for feeling better, not in a dramatic way, not with a clear announcement, just a gentle shift where comfort starts to matter more than accuracy. And once that shift happens, the choices you make begin to follow a very different logic. Your brain is not designed to seek truth at all costs. It is designed to keep you safe, stable, and regulated. Accuracy is useful, but comfort is essential. When you are well rested, fed, and mentally balanced, your brain can afford to prioritize truth. When you are tired, overstimulated, or emotionally drained, accuracy becomes optional. Comfort becomes urgent. This is why certain thoughts show up only at night. Thoughts that soften reality, simplify problems, or excuse behaviors you know are not ideal. You start telling yourself stories that make the present moment easier to tolerate. This is not dishonesty. It is self-soothing disguised as reasoning. The brain craves comfort because discomfort is expensive. It requires energy to sit with uncertainty, to hold conflicting information, to admit you might be wrong, or that something needs effort to fix. Accuracy demands work. Comfort offers relief. When mental energy is low, the brain naturally chooses the cheaper option. Neuroscience helps explain this. When you are exhausted, the prefrontal cortex becomes less active. This is the area responsible for critical evaluation, error detection, and reality testing. At the same time, emotion and reward systems become more influential. These systems do not care about whether something is objectively true. They care about whether it reduces stress right now. So the brain starts filtering information based on how it feels rather than how accurate it is. Ideas that feel reassuring get accepted. Ideas that feel threatening get avoided. You stop asking, "Is this correct?" and start asking, "Does this make me feel okay?" The shift is subtle, but its impact is huge. This is why comforting beliefs become more attractive when you are tired. You assume things will work out without evidence. You downplay risks. You exaggerate reasons to delay or indulge. You believe explanations that remove responsibility or effort. These beliefs feel right because they reduce internal tension. The brain rewards them with a sense of calm. There is also a survival component here. The brain interprets prolonged stress and exhaustion as danger. In response, it seeks to stabilize your emotional state as quickly as possible. Comforting thoughts act like emotional anesthesia. They dull anxiety, sadness, and uncertainty. Accuracy, on the other hand, can intensify those feelings. So accuracy gets sidelined. This is why people are more likely to accept misinformation when tired. Why dramatic narratives feel convincing. Why simple explanations beat nuanced ones. Comforting answers close mental loops. Accurate answers often open more questions. When your brain is exhausted, it wants closure, not complexity. You can see this in everyday behavior. You convince yourself staying up late is self-care because it feels soothing, even though you know it harms you. You tell yourself avoiding a conversation is protecting your peace, even though it creates long-term tension. You believe things that justify the easiest path. These beliefs are not chosen consciously. They emerge because comfort feels like relief. The problem is that comfort-based reasoning creates delayed consequences. It feels good now, but it distorts reality. Over time, those distortions accumulate. Small inaccuracies compound into patterns of avoidance, denial, or stagnation. And because the choices felt emotionally right in the moment, they are hard to question later. What makes this especially tricky is that the brain rewards comfort immediately. Relief feels like confirmation. The reduction in stress feels like proof that the thought was correct. But that relief is not evidence. It is a chemical response. Dopamine and calming neurotransmitters reinforce the belief, regardless of its truth. This is also why confronting reality feels harder at night. Honest reflection can bring discomfort, regret, or urgency. When you are tired, your brain resists those states. It pushes you toward narratives that keep emotions smooth and manageable. This is not weakness, it is regulation. Understanding this changes how you interpret your thoughts. Not every comforting idea is true. Not every uncomfortable idea is wrong. Comfort is not a reliable compass for accuracy, especially when your mental resources are low. The brain is optimizing for survival, not truth. There is something freeing about recognizing this. It means you do not have to take every late-night conclusion seriously. The heaviness, the certainty, the excuses, the soothing justifications, they are often signals of exhaustion, not insight. Your brain is trying to tuck you in emotionally, even if it bends reality to do it. When you are rested, comfort and accuracy can coexist. You can face hard truths without falling apart. When you are exhausted, they compete. Comfort usually wins. That does not make you irrational, it makes you human. Once you see the brain's craving for comfort over accuracy, you start noticing how many decisions are shaped by emotional relief rather than truth. And that awareness alone begins to loosen the grip comfort has over your thinking, especially in those quiet moments before sleep, when the brain is most tempted to choose what feels good over what is real. Distorted risk perception caused by tiredness. There is a strange shift that happens when you are tired where danger either feels huge or invisible. Things that are relatively safe suddenly feel overwhelming, while genuinely risky choices feel harmless, even soothing. You are not suddenly bad at judging reality. Your brain is simply misreading the scale of risk because exhaustion has warped the lens it uses to evaluate threat and safety. Risk perception is not a cold calculation. It is a feeling. Your brain constantly estimates how dangerous or safe something is based on internal signals like energy levels, emotional state, and stress. When you are well rested, those signals are balanced. When you are tired, the signal is distorted. The brain assumes vulnerability and adjusts its predictions accordingly. Here is the unsettling part. Tiredness does not make you more cautious across the board. It makes you inconsistent. Some risks feel exaggerated. Others feel minimized. The logic behind this seems backwards until you understand what the exhausted brain is trying to do. It is not trying to be accurate. It is trying to conserve energy and regulate emotion. When mental fatigue sets in, the brain becomes more sensitive to immediate discomfort and less sensitive to long-term consequences. This changes how risk feels. Immediate emotional pain feels dangerous. Long-term damage feels abstract. So you might avoid a difficult conversation because it feels risky right now, while staying up far too late feels safe because the consequences are delayed. This is why tired people underestimate risks that require foresight. Sleep deprivation reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for evaluating future outcomes. At the same time, emotional and reward centers remain active. The result is skewed risk assessment. The brain weighs short-term comfort more heavily than long-term harm. You can see this clearly in late-night behavior. People take social risks they would not take during the day. They send messages they later regret. They overshare. They make impulsive purchases. The risk does not feel real in the moment. The emotional brain downplays it because acknowledging it would require effort and restraint. At the same time, harmless challenges can feel threatening. A small task feels overwhelming. A minor problem feels catastrophic. This happens because tiredness amplifies negative emotion. Stress hormones rise. Emotional regulation drops. The brain interprets neutral or mildly uncomfortable situations as more dangerous than they actually are. This distortion comes from a survival mechanism. When the brain detects fatigue, it assumes resources are low. In nature, low resources mean higher danger, so the brain increases sensitivity to potential threats. But in modern life, this heightened sensitivity does not match reality. Instead of protecting you, it confuses you. What makes this especially deceptive is that distorted risk perception feels logical. Your reasons sound convincing. You tell yourself now is not the right time, that something bad might happen, that you will deal with it later. These thoughts feel grounded because the emotional response behind them is real, but the interpretation is skewed. Research on sleep deprivation shows that tired brains misjudge probabilities. They overestimate negative outcomes in some situations and underestimate them in others. The brain loses its ability to calibrate. It cannot accurately compare risks. Everything gets filtered through how draining it feels emotionally. This is why tired people are more likely to engage in behaviors they know are risky, like overeating, substance use, reckless scrolling, or staying up too late. The emotional payoff feels immediate and safe. The risk feels distant and unreal. The brain discounts future consequences because it cannot simulate them clearly when exhausted. It also explains why anxiety can spike at night. When risk perception is distorted, uncertainty feels dangerous. Thoughts spiral. Worst-case scenarios feel plausible. The brain is not trying to scare you. It is trying to prepare you with limited information and low energy. Unfortunately, preparation turns into rumination. There is a cruel irony here. The very state that causes distorted risk perception also convinces you that your judgment is sound. Fatigue reduces metacognition, the ability to evaluate your own thinking, so you do not just misjudge risk. You are less aware that you are misjudging it. Understanding this helps reframe late-night decisions. When something feels extremely risky or not risky at all while you are tired, that feeling deserves skepticism. It does not mean ignore your instincts. It means recognize the context they are coming from. A tired brain is not a neutral observer. This is why decisions made after rest often feel obvious in hindsight. You look back and wonder what you were thinking. The answer is simple. You were thinking with a distorted risk map. Once energy returned, the map corrected itself. There is something deeply reassuring in this realization. It means your nighttime fears and impulses are not always reflections of reality. They are reflections of exhaustion. The danger is not that you feel them. The danger is treating them as accurate signals. When you begin to notice distorted risk perception, you gain a small but powerful pause. You start recognizing that urgency, dread, or false safety might be symptoms of tiredness rather than truth. That pause alone can prevent countless irrational decisions. There are many subtle ways exhaustion reshapes your thinking as the day ends. Distorted risk perception is one of the most influential because it alters what feels safe and what feels dangerous. And when that internal compass is off, even familiar paths can lead you somewhere you never intended to go. Overconfidence created by low mental energy. Late at night, a strange kind of certainty settles in. You stop questioning yourself. You stop replaying options. Decisions feel obvious. You feel sure. And that confidence feels calming, almost reassuring, like your mind finally clicked into place. But what is really happening is not clarity. It is fatigue wearing the mask of confidence. When your mental energy drops, your brain does not say, "I am tired." It says, "I am done thinking." And that shutdown gets misinterpreted as certainty. You are not suddenly wiser. You are simply less willing and less able to question yourself. Doubt takes effort. Curiosity takes effort. Double-checking takes effort. Confidence does not. Overconfidence is one of the most deceptive side effects of mental exhaustion. We usually expect tiredness to make us hesitant or unsure. But often it does the opposite. It makes us prematurely certain. The brain looks for closure because closure feels like rest. Settling on an answer ends the mental work. So the brain locks onto the first explanation that feels good enough and treats it as final. This happens because the part of the brain responsible for self-monitoring and error checking becomes less active when energy is low. That system normally asks, "Are you sure?" or "What if you are wrong?" or "Is there another angle here?" When it quiets down, nothing pushes back against your conclusions. Thoughts go unchallenged. Assumptions feel solid. Confidence rises, not because accuracy improved, but because resistance disappeared. You can feel this late at night when you make bold plans for tomorrow. You feel certain you will wake up early, certain you will handle everything, certain that things will work out. Or on the darker side, certain that something is pointless or not worth trying. The certainty feels strong because it ends the internal debate. The brain relaxes once a decision is made, regardless of whether it is realistic. Low mental energy also shrinks perspective. When tired, the brain struggles to simulate future effort. Tasks seem easier than they are. Consequences feel smaller. You underestimate how hard something will be because your mind cannot fully imagine the cost. That underestimation feeds overconfidence. You assume you can handle it because you cannot clearly picture the strain. There is also a social side to this. When mentally exhausted, people speak with more certainty and less nuance. They interrupt more. They judge faster. They feel sure about who is right and who is wrong. Empathy and curiosity require cognitive space. When that space is gone, confidence replaces understanding. What makes this especially tricky is that overconfidence feels like relief. Uncertainty is uncomfortable. Fatigue makes discomfort harder to tolerate. So the brain resolves uncertainty quickly and rewards itself with calm. That calm gets mistaken for correctness. But emotional relief is not evidence of truth. This is why tired decisions often feel embarrassing later. When energy returns, doubt returns with it. You suddenly see complexity again. You notice flaws. You wonder how you were so sure. The answer is simple. You were not thinking better. You were thinking less. There is an important takeaway here. Confidence is not always a sign of clarity. Sometimes it is a sign that your brain is conserving energy by shutting down analysis. Late-night certainty should be treated gently, not obeyed automatically. Once you recognize overconfidence as a symptom of exhaustion, you gain distance from it. You stop treating every strong conclusion as final. You learn to pause and say, "This might feel clear because I am tired, not because it is true." Mental fatigue does not just make you careless. It can make you falsely assured. And that false assurance is powerful because it feels calm, decisive, and complete. Knowing this gives you back control, not by thinking harder, but by knowing when not to trust the certainty that shows up when your mind is ready to rest. Mental shortcuts. Heuristics dominating late at night. Late at night, your brain stops taking the long road. It starts taking shortcuts. Not because it wants to be careless, but because it does not have the energy to do anything else. Thinking deeply feels heavy. Analyzing feels unnecessary. So the mind quietly switches strategies and begins relying on mental shortcuts called heuristics. Heuristics are fast rules your brain uses to make decisions quickly. They are incredibly useful during the day. They help you navigate routine situations without overthinking everything. But at night, when mental energy is low, these shortcuts stop being helpers and start becoming decision makers. When you are tired, your brain does not ask what is the best choice. It asks what usually works or what feels familiar or what requires the least effort. Instead of evaluating evidence, it relies on patterns. If something worked before, it must be fine now. If something feels familiar, it must be safe. If something feels easy, it must be right. This is why late-night thinking feels simple but shallow. Your brain is no longer weighing nuance. It is matching situations to past experiences and acting automatically. That is efficient, but it is not always accurate. Heuristics trade precision for speed, and when your mind is exhausted, speed wins. One common shortcut is the familiarity bias. Things you have done before feel correct simply because they are familiar. That is why you repeat habits you meant to change. The brain says this is what we usually do, so let us not question it. Questioning requires effort. Familiarity feels like certainty. Another shortcut is emotional reasoning. If something feels good, the brain assumes it is good. If it feels uncomfortable, the brain assumes it is bad. Late at night, emotions carry more weight because logical evaluation is costly. So feelings become the filter for truth. There is also the availability shortcut. Your brain judges likelihood based on what comes to mind easily. At night, recent thoughts, worries, or experiences dominate. If something negative happened earlier, it feels more important than it actually is. If something has been on your mind all evening, it feels urgent, even if it can wait. Heuristics dominate because the brain is conserving energy. Deep thinking uses working memory, attention, and control. When those resources are low, the brain shifts to automatic processing. It is not trying to sabotage you. It is trying to get through the day without burning out completely. This is why people overgeneralize late at night. A bad moment becomes a bad day. A bad day becomes a bad life. The shortcut skips steps instead of analyzing context. The brain jumps straight to a conclusion that feels efficient and emotionally consistent. Late at night, you are also more likely to accept simple explanations. Complex problems get reduced to single causes. Nuance disappears. Black and white thinking takes over. This is not because the problem became simpler. It is because your brain no longer has the capacity to hold complexity. The danger of heuristics at night is not that they are always wrong. It is that they feel right. They produce quick answers with minimal effort. And because fatigue reduces self-monitoring, you are less likely to question those answers. This is why advice content and narratives feel more persuasive late at night. Statements that sound confident or emotionally satisfying slide past your critical filters. The brain prefers answers that close loops, not ones that open new questions. Understanding this helps you treat late-night conclusions with caution. When a thought feels obvious, easy, or automatic at night, that is often a sign a shortcut is running the show. It does not mean the thought is false. It means it was generated quickly, not carefully. There is relief in realizing this. You do not have to fight your brain. You just have to recognize its mode. Late at night, your mind is not built for deep analysis. It is built for efficiency and survival. Once you see heuristics for what they are, you stop trusting every fast conclusion. You learn to pause and say, "This feels easy because my brain is tired, not because it is correct." Mental shortcuts are powerful tools, but when they dominate unchecked, especially at night, they quietly steer your decisions away from intention and toward autopilot. And noticing that shift is often enough to keep those shortcuts from deciding everything for you. Stress narrowing thought patterns. When stress builds up, your thinking does not expand. It contracts. Your mind does not explore more options. It locks onto fewer. Late at night, when stress and exhaustion overlap, this narrowing becomes especially strong. You start circling the same thoughts, the same worries, the same conclusions, as if your brain has lost access to everything else. Stress changes how your brain allocates attention. Under pressure, the brain shifts into threat mode. Its job becomes identifying what feels wrong and fixing it as quickly as possible. This is useful in real danger. But psychological stress uses the same circuitry, even when no immediate threat exists. The result is tunnel vision. Instead of seeing a situation from multiple angles, you focus on one interpretation. Instead of considering alternatives, you fixate on what feels urgent or uncomfortable. Your thinking becomes repetitive, rigid, and narrow. You are not choosing this. Your brain is doing it automatically. This happens because stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline flood the system. These chemicals sharpen focus, but they also reduce flexibility. The prefrontal cortex, which allows you to think abstractly and creatively, becomes less active. Meanwhile, survival-oriented circuits take over. They prioritize speed, certainty, and control over nuance. That is why stressed thinking feels intense but limited. You feel strongly about your thoughts, yet you struggle to step back from them. A single problem can fill your entire mental space. Everything else fades into the background. The brain is saying this matters, focus here. Do not get distracted. Late at night, this narrowing becomes even more pronounced. Fatigue removes the mental buffer that normally softens stress. Without that buffer, the mind clings tightly to whatever feels unresolved. You replay conversations. You obsess over decisions. You assume the same outcome again and again because your brain cannot easily imagine alternatives. This is why stress makes people catastrophize. When thought patterns narrow, the mind jumps from a single concern to a single conclusion, often the worst one. There is no room for probability or context. The brain is not asking what else could be true. It is asking, how do I stop this feeling? Stress also reduces curiosity. Curiosity requires safety. When the brain feels under threat, it stops exploring. It stops asking questions. It stops entertaining other explanations. Certainty feels safer than openness. Even negative certainty feels safer than ambiguity. You can see this in how stressed people talk to themselves. The language becomes absolute. Always, never, everything, nothing. These words are signs of narrowed thinking. They reduce complexity into something the brain can manage quickly. What makes this especially convincing is that narrowed thinking feels focused. It feels productive. You believe you are getting to the core of the issue. But often, you are just stuck in a loop. Stress keeps pulling you back to the same mental territory, not because it is the full picture, but because it is familiar. This narrowing also affects decision-making. With fewer options visible, choices feel limited. You feel trapped between extremes. Do it now or avoid it completely. Speak up or shut down. Stay awake or escape into distraction. Subtle options disappear when stress is high. There is an emotional cost to this. Narrow thinking amplifies feelings. When the mind cannot zoom out, emotions feel larger and more intense. Perspective is lost. Small issues feel heavy. Temporary states feel permanent. Understanding this helps soften the grip stress has on your thoughts. When you notice your thinking becoming rigid, repetitive, or extreme, that is a signal. Not that your thoughts are true, but that your nervous system is activated. Your brain is prioritizing protection, not accuracy. The solution is not to argue with stressed thoughts. Arguing requires flexibility, which stress has already reduced. The real shift happens when stress itself is lowered. When the nervous system calms, thought patterns naturally widen again. Options reappear. Perspective returns. Late-night stress does not mean you are thinking clearly about what matters most. It means your mind is narrowed around what feels most pressing. That distinction matters. Once you recognize stress narrowing your thinking, you stop treating every intense thought as a final conclusion. You learn to say, "This feels consuming because I am stressed," not because it is the whole truth. Stress will always narrow the mind when energy is low, but awareness gives you space, and sometimes that space is enough to keep stress from shrinking your world down to a single, exhausting thought. Dopamine depletion affecting motivation and judgment. Late at night, motivation does not disappear all at once. It quietly drains away. Things that mattered earlier suddenly feel pointless. Effort feels heavier. Rewards feel muted. You are not lazy and you are not broken. What you are feeling is the effect of dopamine depletion shaping how your brain judges what is worth doing. Dopamine is not just about pleasure. It is about motivation, anticipation, and value. It helps your brain decide what matters enough to pursue. Throughout the day, dopamine gets spent every time you focus, push through resistance, solve problems, or chase goals. Each task uses a little more of that system. By night, the supply is lower, and the brain starts changing its priorities. When dopamine is depleted, effort stops feeling rewarding. Your brain looks at a task and no longer sees the payoff clearly. Even things you care about feel flat. This is why at night you tell yourself things like it is not worth it, or I will do it tomorrow. Those thoughts feel logical, but they are being shaped by chemistry, not clear judgment. Low dopamine also distorts motivation. Instead of being driven by long-term goals, the brain starts chasing immediate stimulation, scrolling, snacking, watching something familiar. These activities give small, fast dopamine hits with very little effort. The brain prefers them because they temporarily raise dopamine without demanding much energy. This shift is not a character flaw, it is a biological response. When dopamine is low, the brain becomes more sensitive to effort and less sensitive to reward. Everything feels like it costs more than it gives, so the brain protects itself by avoiding effortful choices and gravitating toward easy relief. Judgment is affected too. Dopamine plays a key role in evaluating outcomes. When levels are low, the brain undervalues future rewards and overvalues immediate comfort. Long-term benefits feel distant and abstract. Short-term relief feels important and reasonable. That is why staying up late feels acceptable even when you know it will hurt you tomorrow. This also explains why negative thinking increases at night. Low dopamine makes it harder to imagine positive outcomes. Optimism drops. Confidence drops. The future feels less appealing. The brain is not predicting reality accurately. It is reflecting a depleted motivational system. There is also an emotional effect. Dopamine depletion reduces emotional resilience. Small frustrations feel heavier. Encouragement feels less effective. The brain has less fuel to sustain hope and persistence. This can make people feel unmotivated, indifferent, or quietly discouraged without knowing why. What makes this especially deceptive is that the brain rationalizes dopamine depletion. It does not say I am low on neurotransmitters. It says this does not matter, or this can wait, or this is pointless anyway. Those thoughts feel convincing because motivation is chemically reduced, not because the conclusions are true. This is why late-night decisions often surprise you in hindsight. When dopamine recovers, motivation returns. Goals feel meaningful again. Effort feels manageable. You look back and wonder why you felt so indifferent or avoidant. The answer is not that your values changed. Your neurochemistry did. Understanding this reframes late-night apathy. Loss of motivation at night is not insight. It is a signal of depletion. Your brain is conserving energy by lowering drive and narrowing what feels worthwhile. This also explains why rest restores motivation without effort. When you sleep, dopamine systems reset. You wake up caring again without forcing it. That alone shows how much judgment depends on brain chemistry. Once you recognize dopamine depletion, you stop trusting every thought about what matters late at night. You learn to pause and say, this feels pointless because my system is drained, not because it truly is. Dopamine shapes what feels worth pursuing. When it runs low, motivation and judgment shift together. Knowing that does not magically fix exhaustion, but it does protect you from believing the quiet lie that nothing matters when what your brain really needs is rest. The illusion of clarity before sleep, right before sleep. There is often a moment where everything feels clear. Your thoughts slow down. Conclusions line up. Problems seem solved or neatly summarized. You feel like you finally understand what is going on, what you should do, and how things really are. That feeling can be comforting. It can feel like insight. But most of the time, it is an illusion. This illusion of clarity appears when your brain is too tired to keep questioning itself. Earlier in the day, your mind jumps between possibilities. It revises opinions. It holds uncertainty. That back and forth is not confusion. It is healthy thinking. At night, when mental energy drops, that movement stops. Thoughts settle not because they are complete, but because the brain no longer has the strength to keep them open. Clarity requires work. It requires comparing ideas, testing assumptions, and tolerating ambiguity. When you are exhausted, your brain cannot sustain that process. So instead of continuing to explore, it closes the loop. It picks an explanation, a belief, or a plan and sticks with it. That closure feels like understanding, even when it is just the end of analysis. This is why late-night insights feel powerful. They arrive with confidence and emotional calm. The internal debate goes quiet. You stop questioning. That silence feels like resolution. But silence is not proof of truth. It is often proof of fatigue. Neurologically, this makes sense. The prefrontal cortex, which supports complex reasoning and self-correction, becomes less active when you are tired. At the same time, default and emotional networks take over. These systems prefer coherent stories over accurate ones. They want things to make sense emotionally, not necessarily logically. So your brain starts simplifying reality. Loose ends disappear. Contradictions fade. You create a clean narrative that explains everything. It feels elegant because it reduces mental strain. But that elegance often comes from leaving things out. This illusion is especially strong before sleep because the brain is preparing to shut down. It wants order. It wants closure. Open questions feel uncomfortable when energy is low, so the mind resolves them quickly, sometimes prematurely. The goal is not understanding. The goal is rest. You can see this in how people reinterpret their lives at night. They suddenly feel certain about relationships, goals, or decisions. They decide what things mean. They assign motives. They draw final conclusions. In the morning, those conclusions often soften or fall apart. Not because reality changed, but because the brain regained the ability to hold complexity. The illusion of clarity is also tied to emotional regulation. When you are tired, emotional intensity can drop into a kind of numb calm. That calm feels like balance. But it is often just reduced reactivity. The absence of emotional noise gets mistaken for wisdom. There is a danger in trusting this state too much. Decisions made under the illusion of clarity tend to ignore future consequences. They feel right now, but they are not well tested. Plans made at night often underestimate effort. Judgments made at night often lack compassion and nuance. What makes this illusion convincing is that it feels peaceful. Confusion is tiring. Uncertainty is uncomfortable. The brain rewards closure with relief. That relief becomes associated with the conclusion itself, making it feel correct. Understanding this changes how you treat late-night thoughts. You do not have to reject them completely, but you also do not have to obey them. Late-night clarity is best seen as a draft, not a final version. When you wake up rested, your brain regains flexibility. Questions reopen, new angles appear. That is not regression. It is a return of full processing power. True clarity can survive that reopening. Illusions cannot. Once you recognize the illusion of clarity before sleep, you stop treating exhaustion as insight. You learn to let conclusions wait, and in that pause, you protect yourself from mistaking mental shutdown for understanding, especially in those quiet moments when the mind feels calm simply because it is ready to rest. Emotional memories becoming more influential. Late at night, memories feel different. A conversation that seemed minor during the day suddenly feels huge. A small mistake replays over and over. Achievements feel smaller. Regrets feel heavier. Your brain is not lying. It is just weighting some memories more than others, letting emotion decide what matters. Emotional memories become far more influential when mental energy is low. During the day, your mind can evaluate events with context. You remember a mistake and also recall why it happened and how small it really was. You remember a kind word and the full situation around it. But at night, fatigue weakens those balancing mechanisms. The emotional core of a memory grows louder. Details that triggered strong feelings get magnified. Neutral details fade. What remains is the feeling, not the facts. This happens because emotion and memory are tightly linked in the brain. The amygdala, which processes emotion, strengthens the signal of any memory it tags as important. The prefrontal cortex, which normally helps regulate and contextualize memories, becomes less active when you are tired. The result is that emotional memories rise to the surface, dominate your thinking, and shape your judgments. That is why minor conflicts replay endlessly in your head, why you feel guilt over things you have already handled, why compliments and wins can feel muted or forgotten. Your brain treats the emotional intensity of a memory as proof of its importance, not its accuracy. The stronger the feeling, the louder the memory speaks. This influence shapes decisions as well. Late at night, choices are often guided by what feels emotionally resonant rather than what is logical or practical. You might avoid a task because of a tiny negative memory linked to it, or overvalue an opportunity because it reminds you of a past success. Emotional memory is no longer just background. It becomes a filter for everything you perceive. The effect is subtle but powerful. Emotional memories make past events feel more current. Regrets feel like present failures. Old arguments feel like they are happening again. The mind starts connecting unrelated events because they share the same emotional tone. Fatigue amplifies this effect, making emotions feel like truth rather than a colored interpretation. There is also a biological reason. Emotional memories trigger dopamine and stress-related chemicals, which make the experience feel urgent. Your exhausted brain is more reactive to these signals because it is already low on energy. Emotional salience trumps logic, and the brain treats any strong feeling as a signal to pay attention and act. This is why your late-night thoughts often feel vivid and convincing. The mind assumes emotional intensity equals importance. You feel like you are reflecting deeply, but really the memories are pulling you along. That is why old fears, regrets, or anxieties feel harder to shake at night. They have more influence than they normally would. Understanding this helps you pause before acting on late-night impulses. Recognizing that emotional memories dominate when tired allows you to separate feeling from fact. Not every strong recollection is a signal that you should change course or make a decision. Often, it is just your brain replaying past emotions with amplified volume. Once you see how fatigue magnifies emotional memories, it explains a lot about nighttime thinking. Why small events feel larger than life. Why regret feels heavier. Why decisions feel urgent. Emotional memories are powerful guides, but when mental energy is low, they can steer you away from logic rather than toward it. Awareness gives you a choice. You can note that a memory feels important because it carries emotion, not because it is objectively central. That small step creates distance. And with that distance, you can sleep without letting yesterday's emotions dictate tomorrow's decisions. The desire for closure before resting. Late at night, your brain wants an ending. Not a dramatic one, not a perfect one, just some kind of closure. It wants to tie up loose ends, resolve questions, and make sense of the day. That desire can feel urgent. It can feel necessary. You suddenly need to know what went wrong, what to do next, or how people really feel, and that need shapes almost every decision before bed. The brain craves closure because unresolved thoughts create tension. During the day, you can tolerate uncertainty. You can postpone answers, revisit problems, and tolerate ambiguity. But as energy drops, uncertainty becomes uncomfortable. Fatigue reduces your ability to sit with unknowns, so the mind pushes for a resolution, even if the resolution is incomplete or distorted. This is why people replay conversations endlessly at night. They run through decisions again and again. They imagine outcomes that might never happen. Emotional intensity rises because the brain treats unresolved issues as urgent threats. Closure feels like relief. Lack of closure feels like danger. Neurologically, this is tied to the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. The prefrontal cortex, which supports reasoning and patience, slows down with exhaustion. The limbic system, which processes emotion and threat, remains highly active. That imbalance makes unresolved thoughts feel emotionally heavy. The mind interprets them as pressing problems that require action before sleep. The desire for closure also makes small tasks feel disproportionately important. You might feel compelled to reply to one last message, finish one more chore, or double-check one more thing. The action itself may not matter, but completing it signals an ending to the brain. Even minor decisions get inflated in importance. This need for closure can distort judgment. You might make snap decisions, justify impulsive choices, or overcommit simply to end uncertainty. Your tired mind prioritizes the sense of completion over accuracy or long-term benefit. What feels finished in the moment is often only a temporary patch. Emotional memory amplifies this effect. Past conflicts, mistakes, or regrets seem unresolved, even if they were settled objectively. Your brain treats them as open loops that must be tied up. The stronger the emotional charge, the more urgent the need for closure feels. That is why you can lie awake thinking about things that seemed minor earlier in the day. The desire for closure before sleep is not a flaw. It is a survival mechanism. The brain evolved to reduce cognitive load and emotional tension before rest. Completing unfinished tasks and resolving questions conserves energy and reduces stress. The problem is that modern life rarely allows neat, immediate resolutions. So the mind improvises, sometimes creating conclusions that feel sufficient but are incomplete or biased. Understanding this helps explain nighttime behavior. The compulsive scrolling, the overthinking, the last-minute decisions. They are often driven not by poor judgment, but by a deep need for closure. Your brain is trying to offload tension before rest. Recognizing that, you can approach late-night impulses more gently. Once you see the desire for closure as a biological push rather than a moral failure, you gain distance. You can acknowledge that some questions do not need immediate answers. You can let the brain rest without forcing false resolutions. That small shift protects sleep and prevents exhaustion from steering decisions unnecessarily. In short, the mind's craving for closure before bed is powerful. It can make trivial things feel urgent and distort priorities. But awareness allows you to notice the pull, respect it, and still choose to rest. Closure can wait until your mind is fully alert, and sleep does not have to be sacrificed to satisfy a temporary urge for finality. Short-term relief bias over long-term consequences. Late at night, your brain quietly changes its priorities. It stops asking what is best for you tomorrow and starts asking what will make this moment feel easier. Not because you suddenly stopped caring about the future, but because your mental energy is running low. When that happens, short-term relief begins to outweigh long-term consequences, even when you fully understand what those consequences are. This shift does not feel reckless. It feels reasonable. You tell yourself you deserve a break, that one small indulgence will not matter, that you will deal with the fallout later when you have more energy, and in that moment, those thoughts feel logical. But they are being shaped by exhaustion, not by clear judgment. The brain is wired to prioritize immediate comfort. When resources are low, fatigue signals vulnerability. From an evolutionary perspective, when energy is depleted, the brain assumes survival is at stake. In that state, reducing discomfort now feels more important than protecting future outcomes. Relief becomes a form of safety. This is why late-night decisions skew toward avoidance and indulgence. You skip preparation because it feels heavy. You stay up scrolling because it distracts you from discomfort. You choose familiarity over effort. Each choice offers quick relief. The long-term cost is invisible in the moment because your brain cannot fully simulate tomorrow when it is exhausted today. Neurologically, this happens because the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning and consequence evaluation, becomes less active with fatigue. Meanwhile, emotional and reward systems remain engaged. The balance shifts. Immediate reward feels more valuable than delayed benefit. The future feels distant and abstract. Now feels real. This is also why people underestimate consequences at night. In theory, that poor sleep will affect you. But emotionally, it does not register. The brain discounts future discomfort because it cannot feel it yet. Immediate relief, however, is tangible. That imbalance drives behavior. Short-term relief bias is especially powerful because it is self-reinforcing. Each time you choose relief, your brain gets a small chemical reward. Dopamine spikes briefly, stress decreases slightly. That relief feels like confirmation that the choice was correct. But that confirmation is misleading. It is a response to comfort, not to wisdom. Over time, these small choices stack up. One night does not ruin anything, but repeated patterns of choosing relief over foresight shape habits. Sleep debt accumulates. Goals get postponed. Self-trust erodes. And yet, each individual decision felt justified at the time. What makes this bias hard to resist is that it does not feel impulsive. It feels compassionate toward yourself. You feel like you are listening to your needs. The problem is that exhaustion distorts what your needs actually are. What feels like kindness in the moment often creates more strain later. Understanding this bias changes how you interpret late-night urges. Instead of asking, "Why am I so undisciplined?" you can ask, "What kind of relief is my brain craving right now?" Often, it is not entertainment or indulgence. It is rest. It is disengagement. It is an end to stimulation. The key is not to deny relief, but to choose forms of relief that do not sabotage the future. Real relief restores energy. False relief borrows it from tomorrow. When you are tired, your brain struggles to tell the difference. Once you recognize short-term relief bias, you gain a pause. That pause gives you the chance to separate what feels good now from what will actually help you recover. You do not need to argue with your brain. You just need to understand what mode it is in. Late at night, your brain is not optimized for long-term strategy. It is optimized for comfort. Knowing that does not make the pull disappear, but it makes it visible. And when a bias becomes visible, it loses some of its power. Short-term relief bias is not a personal weakness. It is a predictable response to fatigue, and recognizing it is often the difference between a choice that feels good for a moment and one that truly supports you when morning comes. Habit loops triggered by nighttime routines. Late at night, your brain starts running on autopilot. The routines you have repeated over weeks, months, or years begin to dominate your behavior without any conscious thought. Brushing your teeth, scrolling on your phone, checking messages, pouring a late snack. These actions become habit loops. They are triggered automatically by cues in your environment and reinforced by small rewards. And at night, they take over because your mental energy is low. Habit loops are made of 3 parts: a cue, a routine, and a reward. At night, cues are everywhere: the dim lights, the quiet of your room, the feel of your pillow. These cues automatically trigger routines you've done countless times. Your brain does not have to make a decision. It recognizes the pattern and executes it. The reward, feeling relaxed, entertained, soothed, or distracted, reinforces the behavior, making it more likely to happen again tomorrow. The danger of nighttime habit loops is that they often conflict with long-term goals. You may plan to sleep early, meditate, or read, but the loop you built over time, scrolling social media, snacking, binge watching, wins because it is faster, easier, and already wired into your brain. Fatigue weakens your prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for self-control, so resisting the loop feels exhausting. The brain defaults to the automated routine because it conserves energy. Emotional states amplify the power of habit loops at night. Tiredness, stress, or boredom make the rewards feel more enticing. A brief dopamine hit from scrolling or a small sugar fix feels significant when your energy is low. Your brain interprets these small rewards as important, even if the behavior is counterproductive in the long term. Over time, the loops strengthen, and the pull of the habit becomes nearly irresistible. Another subtle effect is that habit loops narrow your options. The brain starts seeing only the automated routine as available. Alternatives, even ones you consciously prefer, require effort, and effort feels heavy at night. So the loop not only directs behavior, it constrains choice, making you feel trapped by your own patterns. This is why late night behaviors often surprise you in the morning. You wake up wondering why you stayed up scrolling, why you had a late snack, or why you avoided sleep. It is not lack of willpower. It is the power of habit loops combined with fatigue. Your brain was following a path that has been reinforced thousands of times, triggered automatically by the cues of your evening environment. Understanding habit loops changes how you approach nighttime behavior. Awareness alone does not break them, but it allows you to redesign cues, modify routines, or change the rewards. Dim lights, putting your phone out of reach, and preparing a clear sleep ritual can interrupt old loops and establish new ones. The goal is to give your brain a path that aligns with your long-term goals while still satisfying the need for comfort or relief. The key is recognizing that late night routines are not neutral. They are powerful, automatic patterns shaped by repetition and reward. They dominate when mental energy is low. Once you see them, you stop treating every action as a conscious choice and start treating it as part of a predictable loop that you can modify. Habit loops are neither good nor bad. They are tools your brain uses to save energy. The problem is when the loops no longer serve you. Nighttime is when they are most likely to take over, but it is also when subtle adjustments can have the biggest impact. Awareness, small changes, and consistency allow you to guide these loops rather than be guided by them. Once you understand how habit loops drive your nighttime behavior, you can take control. You can interrupt automatic patterns, replace them with healthier routines, and finally let your brain rest instead of running old programs that no longer serve you. Decreased ability to regulate emotions. Your emotions feel louder when your brain is running low on energy. Things that seemed small or manageable during the day suddenly feel heavy. A tiny frustration becomes a big deal. A fleeting worry sticks and won't let go. You are not imagining it. Your ability to regulate emotions diminishes as mental energy drops, leaving feelings sharper, more immediate, and harder to control. Emotional regulation depends on the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for reasoning, perspective, and self-control. During the day, it keeps your impulses in check, helping you respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. At night, fatigue slows this area down while the limbic system, which drives emotion, remains highly active. That imbalance allows your feelings to take the lead while rational filters weaken. The result is a mind where emotions dominate and logic struggles to keep up. That is why small annoyances can feel catastrophic late at night. A curt message, a minor mistake, or even a fleeting memory of a past conflict can trigger an outsized reaction. Your brain interprets these emotional signals as urgent, demanding immediate attention, even if the context does not warrant it. You replay situations endlessly, ruminate over decisions, and imagine outcomes that will probably never happen. Reactivity takes over because your regulatory systems are exhausted. Sleep deprivation makes this effect worse. Research shows that even mild fatigue increases activity in the amygdala, the brain's emotional hub, while reducing connectivity with the prefrontal cortex. Emotional memories, regrets, and anxieties suddenly feel immediate and pressing. The brain struggles to step back, leaving you stuck in loops of thought and feeling that seem impossible to escape. This decreased emotional regulation also explains impulsive choices at night. You might lash out in a message, grab comfort food, overindulge, or avoid responsibilities. Each of these behaviors provides brief relief, but rarely aligns with your long-term goals. The brain is prioritizing immediate emotional balance because it no longer has the energy to manage impulses effectively. Even positive emotions can become distorted. Excitement or happiness may feel overwhelming, leading to overstimulation, poor judgment, or hasty decisions. Fatigue reduces your ability to moderate intensity, so both positive and negative emotions are exaggerated. The mind experiences extremes rather than balance. One subtle but important aspect is how emotional memories gain influence. Past conflicts, regrets, or embarrassing moments resurface with more weight than they would during the day. The emotional intensity of these memories drives reactions in the present. Your tired brain treats them as urgent, creating a sense of immediacy that distorts judgment. Understanding this pattern reframes late-night behavior. Intense feelings are not a sign of personal weakness or irrationality. They are a predictable outcome of diminished regulatory capacity. Recognizing that your brain is more reactive than reflective allows you to pause, rather than automatically acting on amplified emotions. There are small interventions that help. Mindfulness, journaling, or delaying decisions until morning allow your prefrontal cortex to regain influence. Even simply acknowledging that emotions feel stronger because your brain is tired creates a buffer between feeling and action. Awareness is a tool that helps prevent impulsive reactions and protects your long-term well-being. Decreased emotional regulation at night is biological, not moral. Your brain is signaling fatigue, vulnerability, and the need for rest. Once you recognize the pattern, you can treat your intense emotions with patience, avoid impulsive decisions, and allow your mind to recover. In short, your emotional intensity at night is predictable. Reactions feel amplified because your regulatory systems are depleted, leaving impulses in charge. Awareness and small pauses are often enough to preserve clarity, sleep, and long-term well-being. Fatigue does not make you broken. It just changes the way your brain handles feelings, and noticing it gives you back control. Intuition feeling stronger than logic when tired. When your mind is exhausted, something strange happens. Thoughts that once felt deliberate and measured suddenly feel slower, heavier, and harder to trust. At the same time, gut feelings, hunches, and instincts rise to the surface. Intuition begins to feel stronger than logic, not because you are thinking more clearly, but because your brain is running low on the resources that support careful reasoning. Intuition is not magic. It is your brain recognizing patterns from past experiences and delivering them as a quick impression. During the day, your rational mind evaluates those impressions, asking questions, checking details, and weighing consequences. At night, fatigue weakens this evaluation system. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for analysis and self-monitoring, slows down, while older brain systems that generate automatic judgments remain active. Suddenly, your gut feels decisive, and your rational mind struggles to keep up. This is why tiredness can make you overtrust feelings that would otherwise be double-checked. You might feel certain about a decision or conclusion without being able to articulate why. The clarity feels compelling because your brain interprets speed and emotional weight as confidence. Your mind is not producing better insight. It is simply bypassing effortful thought. Emotions amplify the effect. When energy is low, the limbic system, the part of your brain that processes emotion, has more influence over decisions. Feelings about people, events, or choices are processed faster than logic, and they feel urgent and compelling. A hunch about a friend, a situation, or a task carries more weight than a reasoned argument, simply because evaluating arguments takes more effort than following instinct. This shift has both advantages and risks. On one hand, intuition can help you make rapid decisions when time or resources are limited. It can surface patterns you would not consciously notice. On the other hand, reliance on intuition when tired can reinforce biases and shortcuts. Your brain favors familiar solutions and emotionally salient information, which may feel right but is not always accurate. The problem is subtle. Your instincts feel right because thinking hard has become exhausting. Each decision, each choice you've made throughout the day, has drawn from the same pool of cognitive resources. By evening, there is little left for careful deliberation. The brain defaults to fast, effortless heuristics, what you call intuition. This is why logical arguments that feel simple in the morning can feel irrelevant or heavy at night. You may notice yourself justifying decisions with gut feelings. This feels right. I trust my instincts. I know what to do. Those statements sound rational in the moment, but they are often compensating for diminished analytical capacity. Intuition feels stronger than logic because logic is temporarily offline. Understanding this explains why people make decisions at night they would question in the morning. The gut is louder than the mind's reasoning engine, and the mind often interprets that volume as accuracy. It is not a moral failing or laziness. It is a predictable consequence of fatigue interacting with the way your brain prioritizes efficiency. Awareness is key. Recognizing that intuition feels stronger when you are tired allows you to pause before acting. It gives you the chance to defer decisions until your cognitive resources are replenished or to check instinctive judgments against reason when possible. Simply naming the effect, intuition overpowering logic, reduces the chance that tiredness alone will dictate your choices. In essence, your instincts do not lie, but they are amplified when rational oversight is low. The louder they feel, the less energy your brain has left to critically evaluate them. By noticing the phenomenon, you gain a measure of control, understanding that what feels like insight might just be your exhausted brain seeking the easiest path. Avoidance of discomfort driving poor choices. When your mind is tired, discomfort feels heavier than it actually is. A small task becomes monumental. A minor conflict feels unbearable. A simple decision suddenly feels like climbing a mountain. Fatigue amplifies the brain's desire to avoid any kind of pain, effort, or tension, and that avoidance quietly drives poor choices. Avoidance is natural. Your brain evolved to protect you from danger and conserve energy. During the day, you can weigh discomfort against reward, tolerate minor stress, and push through tasks. At night, that calculation changes. Mental energy is low, willpower is depleted, and the brain prioritizes immediate relief over long-term benefit. Suddenly, the easiest path is the most appealing, even if it leads to consequences you normally would avoid. This is why small responsibilities are postponed. That email that takes 5 minutes suddenly feels like an ordeal. That conversation you need to have suddenly feels emotionally unsafe. The brain exaggerates the discomfort, making avoidance feel necessary and rational. In reality, the magnitude of the task has not changed. Your perception has. Neurologically, avoidance at night is linked to decreased activity in the prefrontal cortex, which normally evaluates consequences and manages effort. Meanwhile, the limbic system, which responds to discomfort and stress, remains highly active. The imbalance makes pain or tension feel more urgent and important than long-term goals. Your mind interprets avoidance as the most logical choice because evaluating alternatives requires energy you no longer have. Emotional amplification plays a role too. Tiredness increases sensitivity to negative feelings. Small anxieties or frustrations become magnified, and the brain responds by steering you away from them. This is why comfort behaviors, scrolling, snacking, watching videos, suddenly feel essential. They provide immediate relief from amplified discomfort. The cost tomorrow feels abstract and far away, so it does not compete with the urgent need to feel better now. Avoidance also narrows perspective. When your goal becomes simply reducing discomfort, options shrink. You stop seeing strategies that require effort but would pay off later. You default to familiar, easy choices because novelty or challenge requires mental energy. Over time, repeated avoidance reinforces patterns that favor short-term relief over long-term success. This effect explains why you sometimes wonder how you ended up making choices you swore you would avoid. You may promise yourself to sleep early, eat healthy, or respond thoughtfully, and yet fatigue and avoidance quietly push you toward the easiest option. The decisions do not feel reckless. They feel protective, like your brain is keeping you safe from stress. Recognizing this pattern changes how you respond. When you notice yourself avoiding discomfort late at night, it is often a signal of exhaustion rather than moral failure. Pausing, reframing the task, or postponing the decision until your energy is restored allows you to make more aligned choices. Understanding that avoidance is amplified by fatigue gives you control over what would otherwise feel automatic. In essence, avoidance is a survival mechanism hijacked by exhaustion. Your brain exaggerates minor discomforts, steering you toward easy relief instead of long-term benefit. Awareness allows you to distinguish between genuine obstacles and fatigue-driven fear of effort. That awareness is often enough to prevent avoidance from dictating your choices entirely. Nighttime rumination leading to false conclusions. When your body slows down, your mind often does the opposite. Thoughts begin looping instead of settling. Moments from the day replay. Conversations get reanalyzed. Decisions are revisited again and again. This is nighttime rumination, and it has a dangerous side effect. It pushes your brain toward conclusions that feel true but are often wrong. Rumination is not reflection. Reflection moves forward. Rumination circles. It takes a single thought and worries it repeatedly, searching for certainty or resolution. During the day, you have enough mental strength to interrupt that loop. You can shift attention, apply perspective, or remind yourself of context. At night, that regulating power weakens. The mind gets stuck. The problem is not that you are thinking too much. It is that you are thinking with limited resources. Fatigue reduces the brain's ability to evaluate evidence, consider alternative explanations, and tolerate uncertainty. As a result, the mind starts filling gaps with assumptions. Those assumptions slowly harden into conclusions. This is why nighttime thoughts often drift toward worst-case interpretations. A delayed reply becomes rejection. A small mistake becomes proof of failure. An awkward interaction becomes evidence that something is fundamentally wrong. These conclusions feel convincing because your tired brain is no longer checking them properly. Emotional weight replaces logical balance. Neurologically, this happens because the prefrontal cortex, which helps you reason and reframe, becomes less active with fatigue. Meanwhile, the brain's default mode network, responsible for internal thought and memory replay, becomes more dominant. The result is inward, focused thinking without strong oversight. Thoughts echo without correction. Emotion plays a huge role here. Rumination is fueled by unresolved emotion, not by facts. At night, emotional memories become more accessible and influential. Your brain revisits moments that carry guilt, fear, or regret because they feel important. The intensity of the emotion tricks the mind into believing the conclusion attached to it must also be important and accurate. This is how false conclusions are born. The mind confuses repetition with truth. If a thought keeps returning, it feels meaningful. If it feels meaningful, it feels true. But frequency and emotional intensity are not evidence. They are symptoms of a tired brain trying to create certainty where none exists. Nighttime rumination also narrows perspective. You stop seeing the full picture. Positive evidence fades. Neutral explanations disappear. The mind fixates on a single interpretation and treats it as final. Because fatigue limits cognitive flexibility, it becomes harder to challenge the story you are telling yourself. This is why decisions made during rumination often feel urgent and absolute. You suddenly want to confront someone, send a message, make a drastic change, or mentally rewrite the future. The conclusion feels obvious in the moment. By morning, it often feels exaggerated or misplaced. Understanding this pattern is powerful. It explains why thoughts that feel profound at night can feel distorted later. The insight did not improve overnight. Your mental energy did. What changed was not the situation, but your brain's ability to evaluate it fairly. Nighttime rumination is not a sign that you are uncovering hidden truths. It is often a sign that your brain is tired and looping. The conclusions it reaches are shaped by exhaustion, emotion, and repetition rather than clarity. Once you recognize this, you gain distance. You do not need to fight the thoughts or force them away. You simply need to stop treating them as verdicts. Thoughts formed in exhaustion do not deserve immediate action. Rumination wants certainty before rest, but real clarity rarely arrives when the mind is depleted. The most accurate conclusion you can draw at night is often the simplest one. You are tired, and tired brains are not reliable judges of reality. Increased nostalgia bias after dark. As the day fades, memories start to change their tone. The past begins to feel warmer, softer, and more emotionally charged than it did hours earlier. Moments you barely noticed during the day suddenly glow with meaning. Old songs hit harder. Old photos feel heavier. Past versions of your life start looking simpler, safer, and somehow better. This is nostalgia bias, and it becomes stronger as mental energy drops. Nostalgia bias is the brain's tendency to remember the past more positively than it actually was. During the day, your mind can hold nuance. You remember both the good and the bad. At night, that balance weakens. Fatigue reduces your ability to contextualize memories, so the emotional highlights take center stage while the discomfort fades into the background. What remains is a curated version of the past that feels comforting and idealized. This happens because tired brains crave emotional safety. When energy is low, the brain seeks familiarity and reassurance. The past is familiar. It is known. Even if it was difficult, it feels predictable compared to the uncertainty of the future. Nostalgic memories provide emotional warmth with very little effort, making them especially appealing when your mind is exhausted. Neurologically, fatigue weakens the prefrontal cortex, which normally helps you evaluate memories realistically. At the same time, emotional and memory centers become more influential. Emotional salience overrides accuracy. Memories tied to strong feelings are recalled more easily, and the brain fills in missing details with emotion rather than fact. That is why the past can suddenly feel golden, even if it was complicated or painful at the time. This bias subtly affects judgment. You might start believing you were happier before, more confident before, or more fulfilled in an earlier phase of life. You compare your tired present self to an idealized memory, not to reality. The comparison feels unfair, but convincing. Nostalgia whispers that something important was lost, even if nothing objectively changed. Nostalgia bias also influences decisions. You might feel tempted to reconnect with people from the past, revisit old habits, or romanticize paths you left behind. These urges feel emotionally meaningful, but they are often driven by fatigue rather than clarity. The brain is not evaluating whether the past was better. It is simply using it as a source of comfort. The danger is subtle. Nostalgia bias can create dissatisfaction with the present. Current challenges feel heavier when contrasted with a softened memory of earlier times. The present feels dull or stressful, not because it truly is, but because your brain is comparing it to a filtered highlight reel. This can lead to unnecessary regret, second-guessing, or emotional restlessness before sleep. Understanding this bias reframes those nighttime thoughts. Missing the past does not mean you made the wrong choices. Feeling nostalgic does not mean life is worse now. It often means your brain is tired and reaching for emotional familiarity. Awareness helps you avoid turning emotion into conclusions. There is also a biological payoff. Nostalgic memories release comforting neurochemicals that reduce stress and loneliness. That is why they feel soothing. The problem is not nostalgia itself. The problem is mistaking emotional comfort for truth. The past feels better because it is emotionally edited, not because it was objectively better. Once you recognize increased nostalgia bias after dark, you can treat those memories gently without letting them steer decisions. You can appreciate the warmth without letting it rewrite your story. The past does not need to be corrected or relived in that moment. It can simply be remembered for what it is, incomplete and human. As energy returns with rest, perspective returns too. The past regains its complexity. The present feels less unfair. Nostalgia loses its grip. What felt like longing reveals itself as fatigue, and that awareness protects you from letting a tired brain turn memory into judgment. Fear-based thinking intensifying before sleep. As your body starts winding down, your thoughts often take a darker turn. Worries that barely crossed your mind during the day suddenly feel urgent and threatening. Small uncertainties grow into imagined dangers. Scenarios you would normally dismiss begin to feel plausible. Fear-based thinking intensifies before sleep, not because your life suddenly became more dangerous, but because your brain is tired and more vulnerable to threat signals. Fear is one of the brain's most primitive functions. It exists to keep you safe. During the day, higher cognitive systems help regulate it. You can assess risk, apply logic, and remind yourself what is realistic. At night, mental fatigue weakens those systems. The brain's threat detection center stays alert, but the parts that calm it down lose strength. Fear becomes louder, logic becomes quieter. This is why nighttime fears often feel irrational yet convincing. You might worry about things that have never happened, replay conversations looking for hidden danger, or imagine worst-case futures with startling clarity. The fear feels real in your body. Your heart rate changes. Your muscles tense. The physical sensation reinforces the thought, making it feel true. Neurologically, this is driven by increased amygdala activity combined with reduced prefrontal control. The amygdala scans for threat and reacts emotionally. The prefrontal cortex normally evaluates and regulates those reactions. When you are tired, that regulation weakens. The brain defaults to caution. It would rather falsely detect danger than miss a real one. That bias made sense for survival. It is less helpful when you are lying in bed. Fear-based thinking also thrives on uncertainty. At night, unresolved questions feel heavier. The brain dislikes open loops, especially when energy is low. Fear fills the gaps. If you do not know how something will turn out, your tired brain assumes the worst. This creates a sense of urgency and unease that makes rest difficult. Emotional memory plays a role as well. Fearful memories are stored strongly because they once helped you survive. At night, these memories become more accessible. Past mistakes, embarrassments, or failures resurface with emotional weight. Your brain uses them as evidence, even when they are no longer relevant. The fear feels justified because it is familiar. This is why nighttime fear often feels personal. You are not just afraid of abstract things. You are afraid of what those things say about you. Fear-based thinking narrows perspective, focusing on vulnerability and risk while ignoring resilience and context. Strengths fade from view. Only threats remain. The danger is that fear-based thinking can push you toward poor decisions. You might avoid things unnecessarily, over-prepare, send anxious messages, or mentally catastrophize. These actions feel protective in the moment. In reality, they are driven by a brain that is overestimating danger because it is exhausted. Understanding this pattern changes how you respond to nighttime fear. Instead of asking whether the fear is valid, you can ask whether you are rested enough to evaluate it properly. Often, the answer is no. That does not mean the fear is meaningless. It means it does not need immediate action. Fear before sleep is not intuition. It is not insight. It is a signal of fatigue interacting with a threat-sensitive system. Recognizing that gives you distance. You can acknowledge the feeling without obeying it. As rest returns, fear loses its grip. The same thoughts that felt terrifying at night often feel manageable or even irrelevant in the morning. That shift reveals the truth. The danger did not change. Your brain state did. Fear-based thinking intensifies before sleep because your mind is tired, not because the world suddenly became unsafe. Remembering that can be enough to let the thoughts pass and allow rest to do what fear never can. Restore clarity. The brain's resistance to uncertainty at night. Your brain becomes far less tolerant of not knowing. Questions that felt manageable earlier suddenly feel urgent. Unfinished thoughts itch for answers. Unclear situations feel uncomfortable in a way that is hard to ignore. This is the brain's resistance to uncertainty showing up strongest when mental energy is low. Uncertainty requires patience. It asks the brain to hold multiple possibilities at once, delay conclusions, and tolerate discomfort without immediate resolution. During the day, your mind can do that. You can say, "I will figure it out later," or "I do not need to decide right now." But as fatigue sets in, that ability weakens. The brain wants clarity, even if the clarity is false. This happens because uncertainty is cognitively expensive. Holding open questions requires active regulation from the prefrontal cortex. When energy drops, that system struggles. Meanwhile, the emotional parts of the brain dislike ambiguity. They interpret not knowing as a potential threat. When regulation weakens, discomfort rises, and the brain starts pushing for closure. That is why nighttime thinking often feels urgent. You suddenly feel the need to decide how someone feels about you, what a situation means, or what you should do next. The question itself feels heavier than it should. The brain would rather settle on an imperfect answer than sit with the discomfort of uncertainty. Neurologically, this is driven by an imbalance. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for flexible thinking and tolerance of ambiguity, becomes less active with fatigue. The limbic system, which reacts to uncertainty with anxiety, remains alert. The result is a mind that feels pressured to resolve things quickly, even without enough information. This resistance to uncertainty often leads to overinterpretation. A delayed reply becomes intentional avoidance. A neutral comment becomes criticism. A lack of clarity becomes a negative conclusion. These interpretations feel convincing because they reduce uncertainty. The emotional relief of having an answer outweighs the accuracy of the answer itself. The brain is not seeking truth in these moments. It is seeking relief. Certainty calms the nervous system. Uncertainty keeps it activated. When tired, the brain prioritizes calming itself, even if it has to invent explanations to do so. This also explains impulsive nighttime decisions. You might commit to something prematurely, send a message you would normally wait on, or mentally lock in a plan before fully thinking it through. The decision itself brings relief because it ends the uncertainty. Whether it is the right decision becomes secondary. Emotional memory intensifies this effect. Past experiences where uncertainty led to pain become more accessible at night. Your brain uses those memories as warnings, pushing you to resolve things now to avoid imagined future discomfort. The fear is not always conscious, but it drives the urgency. What makes this tricky is that the conclusions you reach feel logical in the moment. They feel settled. By morning, they often feel rushed or exaggerated. That shift is not because the facts changed. It is because your brain regained the ability to tolerate not knowing. Understanding this pattern gives you leverage. When you feel an intense need for certainty at night, it is often a signal of fatigue rather than insight. You do not need to solve everything before sleep. Some questions are better left open until your mind has the strength to handle them. The brain's resistance to uncertainty at night is not a flaw. It is a protective response from a tired system. It wants peace before rest. Recognizing that allows you to delay conclusions, avoid false clarity, and let uncertainty exist without forcing it into an answer. Not knowing feels uncomfortable when energy is low, but discomfort does not mean danger. Sometimes the most accurate choice is to let the question remain unanswered until your brain is rested enough to see it clearly. Circadian rhythm disruption impairing reasoning. Your ability to think clearly depends on timing more than you realize. It is not just about how tired you feel. It is about whether your brain is operating at the right biological hour. When your circadian rhythm is disrupted, reasoning does not slowly decline. It misfires. Decisions feel harder, thoughts feel foggier, and judgment quietly becomes unreliable. Your circadian rhythm is the internal clock that tells your brain when to be alert and when to rest. It regulates hormones, attention, memory, and emotional balance. During the day, this rhythm supports focus and logic. As night approaches, it gradually shifts your brain toward recovery mode. When that rhythm is ignored or pushed past its limits, reasoning suffers. The problem is that the brain does not shut down evenly. Logical reasoning, planning, and impulse control decline faster than emotional and reactive systems. That means you still feel awake enough to think, but not equipped to think well. You may believe you are being rational, but the systems that verify accuracy and weigh consequences are already impaired. This is why late decisions often feel confident but turn out flawed. Circadian misalignment reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for reasoning and judgment. At the same time, emotional and habitual systems remain active. The brain keeps operating, but the quality of its output drops. Disruption makes this worse. Artificial light, screens, irregular schedules, and late stimulation confuse the internal clock. The brain receives mixed signals. It is told to stay alert while biologically preparing for rest. This conflict creates cognitive inefficiency. You feel wired but mentally dull. Thoughts feel slow, yet emotions feel sharp. When circadian rhythm is off, the brain struggles with complexity. Abstract thinking becomes harder. Risk assessment becomes distorted. You underestimate long-term consequences and overvalue immediate outcomes. Simple logic feels effortful. Shortcuts feel appealing. That is not a character issue. It is a timing issue. This impairment explains why people justify strange choices at night. You might believe you are reasoning through a problem, but your brain is missing key inputs. Memory recall becomes less accurate. Attention narrows. Contradictory information is ignored because processing it requires more energy than the system has available. Circadian disruption also affects confidence. Studies show that people become more certain in their judgments even as accuracy declines. The brain mistakes decisiveness for correctness. That is a dangerous combination. You feel sure while being wrong, and you lack the cognitive tools to catch the error. Emotion compounds the issue. When reasoning weakens, Emotional logic fills the gap. You decide based on how something feels rather than what makes sense. Fear, comfort, nostalgia, or urgency take over. These emotions are not new. They are just no longer being regulated properly. Another effect is mental rigidity. The tired, misaligned brain struggles to adapt. Once it lands on a conclusion, it sticks to it. Alternative explanations feel unnecessary or annoying. This makes late-night conclusions feel final, even when they are built on incomplete information. Understanding circadian rhythm disruption changes how you interpret late thinking. It explains why clarity seems to return after rest. The insight did not magically appear. The brain simply regained the timing it needs to function properly. You are not failing at reasoning when your circadian rhythm is off. You are reasoning under the wrong conditions. Expecting clarity during biological low points is like expecting sharp vision in dim light. The system is not broken. It is out of sync. Once you recognize this, you stop trusting every thought equally. You learn which hours are meant for analysis and which are meant for recovery. Respecting that boundary protects you from conclusions that feel solid at night but collapse under daylight. Circadian rhythm disruption does not just make you tired. It quietly impairs judgment, narrows thinking, and reshapes decisions. And the most dangerous part is that it does all of this while convincing you that you are still thinking clearly.